Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thank you for joining us today on Market Journal. Hey, it's our last show of September and the first show of the new fall season. Let's make it a good one. Beginning our broadcast today, if you tuned in last week, you may have seen our story about ways to combat nitrate poisoning in cattle. This week, we're talking about prussic acid, something that occurs less frequently, but can be no less deadly. Recent frosts have heightened the risk of prussic acid poisoning, with plants in the sorghum family being susceptible. Nebraska Extension Forage and Crop Residue Specialist Daren Redfearn joined me to discuss causes of prussic acid poisoning and offer management strategies to help prevent animal losses.
Yeah, so prussic acid's kind of the layman's term. It's not as probably need to be more concerned with it than prussic acid, but basically what prussic acid is hydrocyanic acid, which is hydrogen cyanide. So the cyanide is the part that causes the issues in the animals.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. It can be pretty lethal to livestock, right?
Yeah, it can in pretty small doses. The toxicity is dose dependent, which is the amount or the concentration of the prussic acid in the plants, and then also related a little bit to the amount that they're able to consume. So even though prussic acid is always around in sorghum plants, is typically the species that is most problematic. Animals typically are not able to consume enough of the poison to cause much issue.
Okay, so would there be any symptoms as to what you could see if there is too much prussic acid?
Yeah, sadly about the first symptom anyone ever notes is animal death.
Okay.
So it's pretty critical to understand a little bit about what can cause it and how to manage around it.
Okay, and I know you got your plants here for some reason because you're going to talk about some of the management protocols, management recommendations that we can do for producers. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so typically the prussic acid can be quite a problem during the summer months, but as those plants grow, the prussic acid becomes diluted, so they're able to graze these plants. The forage plant that it's typically most problematic in are the sorghum species. Okay, Sudan grass, the sorghum Sudan grass hybrids, and then also grain sorghum. Grain sorghum is actually the one that has the highest concentration of prussic acid. Johnson grass is another sorghum cousin that also can cause some problems. What causes the issue this time of year, though, is typically like we had in the last couple of weeks. We've had those cold spells that our temperatures are right at a little bit below freezing. Usually what we see on the sorghum plants, we'll notice the top growth of the plant is killed. These plants I've got here were protected so they don't have that top growth, but many of the plants in the pasture have a desiccated top growth. The problem we get is down to the bottom of the plant. These tillers down here are typically protected a lot by the canopy, so the temperatures will remain warm. As we've seen this week and possibly in the next week, those temperatures are going to rise up, so these growth of these bottom tillers will continue. So from a management standpoint, typically if a plant's got one tiller, like this plant that I'm holding, typically animals are not going to be able to consume enough of these that they're going to cause much of an issue. Plants that have 4 or 5 tillers on them that are taller than 5 inches tall, like this one, these are the guys here that can cause problems even if the top part of this plant is dead. So how we manage around that, one of the things that we try to manage, remember I said earlier that it's dose dependent.
Sure.
So even though the concentration is there, if the animals are full of dry hay before they go out, they're not going to be as hungry and they're not going to be able to consume enough of these young tillers to cause the problems that we've talked about earlier.
We've included a NEB guide with more information on prussic acid poisoning on the Market Journal website. Time for a check of markets now, and Tredas' Doug Simon joined me on Thursday morning, and between rallies in corn and soybeans, steady exports overseas, and coronavirus relief payments, there was plenty to discuss. But I began by getting Doug's thoughts on current crop conditions, harvest progress, and early yield reports.
We're about 8% in the U.S. and kind of around 11% expected, and last year we were about 6%, and on average we're about 10%, this time of the year. And Nebraska is about 10% harvested versus 4% last year. So everybody's pretty anxious. Things dried down here, so they feel like, man, we need to get going, but we're really kind of on pace, where we need to be. But it seems like corn's been, drying down probably slower than everybody expected. Soybean side of it, they're 6% harvested. Usually we're about 6% on average, but again, there's a big variation, I think, in how things dried down this year because of the dry conditions, and some of the beans were still pretty green here just a couple weeks ago, and so there was a lot of wetter beans out there, so people are kind of nosing around trying to pick out the dry ones and get them into some of the processors for some early harvest premiums. Okay,
and corn and soybean rally has been in the news too. Kind of gone down a little bit in the last few days, but how big of a rally was that? Kind of put that into context for us as far as past rallies.
Well, pretty substantial. I always talk about commodity markets and you have big rallies, 30%. Recently we've rallied 20% in the beans. We went from a low down in kind of in that 865 area, and we hit 1046 last Friday. About a 20% rally. We've traded back to about 1005 on Thursday morning. The bean side of it, we were down to 320. These lows were kind of formed back in early August, went up to 379. It was about an 18% rally. But you look at that, that's 59 cents on the corn and $1.81 on the beans. And in the old days, if we went from $2 corn to $2.50 back in the 90s and 2000s early on, that was a pretty substantial rally. Last summer we went from $4 level up to $4.74 with all the prevent plant. So when you look at the corn rally we've had, 59 cents, pretty substantial, and you look at the bean rally of $1.81, and given the fact that we spent so much time below $9 during the year, it's pretty big rally.
And with everything that you've said, how aggressive do we need to be with our marketing, our selling strategies, our risk management right now?
We've been looking at the PLC program on the corn, and that's kind of made us drag our feet a little bit because you had a free put from the government. But now that we've rallied back up above that, kind of above that floor, or back to where that floor is in place, I think you have to be more aggressive looking at corn. On the soybean side of it though, we're considerably above like that seasonal average price. If you look at it from back in March, till September, so we're, $10, and you look at the good basis levels we have. You look at, I don't see a reason why you couldn't sell your beans, and if you want to remain bullish and speculate on higher prices, because there's no carry in the bean market. In fact, the March prices are lower than the nearby November. Overnight, they're like 10.05 on the Nov. It's fallen 40 cents, so we've lost some premium there, but the basis levels were still pretty good, and so off the combine for revenues, that's a good selling price. So if you want to remain bullish, there's no carry in the bean market. You sell the beans and you can buy a call. You can do something for 20 cents out there and against out in December. That's against the January futures, and maybe sell something against another month. But there's some strategies you can do there that you can be bullish where you don't have to speculate in the bin.
And one thing we haven't talked about much is the exports, especially to China. Seems like every day you hear news on that. What do you make of all this?
Literally every day there's a sale. Every morning at 8 o'clock you get a private exporter notice from USDA that China or unknown, which is typically China, has bought more beans. And so that's been every day. Now corn's not been quite as frequent, but the bean side, they've probably got about 1 billion bushels on the books. And we're slated to export like 2.1 billion this year. There's wild estimates out there of 20 to 30 million metric tons of soy or corn imports by China. I don't know if those things are ever going to come to fruition, but they have stocks in that country that they've been holding and that are on the world market balance sheet. People have asked me all along here, do we see price rallies in presidential election years? And it didn't look like it until about a month ago.
Okay, that's true.
But the CPAP payments and the different payments that we received, those have been forthcoming. So if it hasn't been on the market, it's been from the government transfers.
And yeah, let's get into CFAP because big news from the USDA late last week regarding that second round of coronavirus relief payments. So this is part two. Just kind of give us a quick reminder about what are we seeing included in this second round?
They're basically going to take your trend adjusted average production history, or APH, numbers that your FSA has, and your crop insurance. It's based on your crop insurance numbers and crop reporting that you do. But it's going to be a trend adjusted, so it's more relevant or more current yield information. But basically, it's going to be 21 cents a bushel on, 23 cents a bushel on corn and 41 cents a bushel on beans. So I just, kind of figured if you had 190 bushel, kind of production numbers, here in the, kind of Cass County or Lancaster County, that, that's going to be, about $13 an acre on beans and probably about 28 acres on the corn side of it.
Thanks to Doug. We've got more information on CFAP applications on the Market Journal website. Next week, we'll be joined by our buddy Mike Briggs for a look at the cattle markets. Next up, you've heard of twin row corn, but twin row cover crops? It's something that Greg Keller has been practicing on his farm near Monroe for the past 5 years. Cover crops have been a good fit for Keller, whose goal is to reduce erosion and runoff, and has practiced no-till for 19 years. However, he ran into hurdles after he first tried planting corn directly into solid seeded rye 6 years ago. That's when he decided to try twin row cereal rye, and he hasn't looked back since. Read about Keller's cover crop practices in the September Nebraska Farmer. Time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, we're officially into fall. Any fall-like weather ahead in the forecast?
Yes, Troy, it's been quite a week. We've seen a little bit of cool, a little bit of warmth, and some near record temperatures here at the end of the week across eastern Nebraska. And as we go forward in time, it looks like we have pretty much a precipitation-free forecast for the most part. And I think the biggest issue is going to be where our temperatures going. And it don't look like they're going in the warm side. They're going to start to drop as we get in the midweek period. So let's go to the upper air models and see how this plays out, because really I see nothing in the way that's going to prevent major harvest activity. As you can see from today's upper air pattern, we have a trough that's going to bring in some cooler air from the north. So the very warm conditions across southern Nebraska will come to an immediate end. We're starting to see that cool air already punch into northern Nebraska. Low pressure is lined up along the surface to the south and southeast of us, but really there's no fetch of moisture into our region. So enjoy the day. It's going to be very windy, and things are going to turn rather abruptly as we go into tomorrow. As we start to see that trough build in, we're going to see that first push of cold air come into our region. High pressure comes in, but not really deep into our region. So we're just going to get a little brush of cool air. It's going to drop our temperatures back to near normal conditions. We'll be back into the 70s statewide. And then as we get into Monday, we see that cold air shift a little bit toward the east. We're going to get a little bit of warmth, maybe a couple of degrees on top of what we see tomorrow. So we're going to be looking at basically the mid to upper 70s across the state. Most of the precipitation we can find along the frontal boundary to our south and our east. And then we see that big plunge of cooler air starting to move into our region from the north as we go into Tuesday. That's going to drop temperatures at least 10 degrees across the state. We're going to be seeing lows that are going to also drop down into the 40s statewide. No precipitation associated with this front. And you can see that most of it will stay toward the eastern Great Lakes region. On Wednesday, that trough broadens out and really starts to push some cool air into our region. We may see some frost conditions in northeastern Nebraska. I think we're going to be safe in the Lincoln and Omaha metropolitan areas. But once again, nothing in the way of precipitation. Some snow flurries to the north of us, but that's as far southward as they get. On Thursday morning, we're going to see that trough starting to lift a little bit toward the east. The cool air will still remain in place, so some scattered frost may not be out of that realm across northeastern Nebraska. And we will still be under the influence of high pressure. We should start to see our winds turn around to the south as we get into late Thursday and Friday, as we see that trough kind of ease up. Warmer conditions start to build into western Nebraska, and we'll see some temperatures warm up as we go into next weekend with the lack of precipitation. But if farther down the road, as we get into the following week, we're going to be dealing with some cooler conditions, much cooler conditions than we've even seen this week coming up. And so if we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast, we see that cold air going to be in place across the eastern United States from Thursday through Tuesday, warm air to our west. And if we look at the GFS model out around October 5th, a big surge of cold air starts to move down to the northern plains. It's very possible we will see a season-ending freeze across at least the northern half of Nebraska. So Troy, overall, we don't have any precipitation of anything to forecast for this next week. The biggest thing will be our temperatures will drop as we go through the middle of next week and start to warm up next weekend. Great harvest activity weather. Please be safe out there because we will have a higher fire danger than normal with these high winds. So overall, a fairly good harvest forecast for this next week.
Thanks, Al. Next up, after years of debates and stalemates, it finally happened. Last month, Nebraska legislators gave approval to a bill that delivers state income tax relief in order to help offset local property taxes paid in and fine-tune the state's business incentives program. While the tax compromise provides temporary relief, it appears more structural reform is still necessary. Market Journal's Bill Dodd recently spoke with an expert to find out how this impacts property owners and what comes next in the process.
In the final days of the 2020 legislative session, the Nebraska unicameral greenlit a notable piece of property tax relief legislation. While a good deal of work remains to be done, property owners in Nebraska can claim a refundable state income tax credit during the 2021-22 fiscal year. While it was welcome news for many to hear a compromise had been reached on an issue that has hounded lawmakers for many years, a compromise nonetheless means not everyone got what they wanted in the end.
As soon as possible.
I mean, there are three major programs that were part of the ultimate compromise. The property tax relief was the one that we're talking about. There's also the state program for businesses, the economic development program that provides tax incentives to businesses or that creates more jobs in the state. And then there's a state funding to help the University of Nebraska Med Center qualify for an awful lot of federal money to develop a new pandemic response center in the Med Center. So those three things were, those three bills were based, or those three programs were put into the one proposal. And the idea was that the rural senators would not vote for the economic development program update and would not vote for the Med Center funding unless everybody agreed to support the property tax relief. And so that was the biggest part of the compromise, that everybody got what they want. Now, in terms of what was proposed last year, there are a couple of things that were controversial. One was property tax relief was going to be funded by closing loopholes in the sales tax that we collect, like on groceries or medicine or doctor office visits or gasoline, for example. Those exemptions are over 150 million a year for each one, and collectively they're over 700 million. So that 700 million in new sales tax revenue would fund a lot of property tax relief. That the governor said that is a no-go.
All things being equal, the debate on how best to fund property tax relief has the state's public school system caught in a funding limbo of sorts. This aspect of the argument has put rural and urban representatives at odds with one another.
There was definitely an urban versus rural dimension to this, and the reason changing the state aid formula was so controversial, it meant that urban and larger, like Grand Island, say, or Kearney or Hastings, larger communities in Nebraska, they would see probably a reduction in the money they get from the state. But the smaller school districts in the rural parts of the county and the rural parts of Nebraska, theirs would go up because, now they're getting very little. And, if they got $100 a head per pupil or something, if they got, 300 pupils, that'd be $30,000 into their budget that's coming out of somebody else's budget somewhere else, in a different part of Nebraska. So there was definitely a strong urban-rural dimension to this, and urban senators were the ones who were making the vote. It's irresponsible to do that, making the argument, it's irresponsible to do this because, if we need to spend money to deal with the COVID crisis or something like that, this is going to tie our hands. So, this is not the time to be starting a program like this. And, hopefully that won't come about, but we'll see what the next few months are like.
While this legislation is still in its infancy, property owners can expect in the short term to receive about a 6% refundable state income tax credit of property taxes paid to local schools, with that amount presumably increasing in the years to come.
It would, this year is estimated to be about a 6% reduction in property taxes paid. In 5 years, that amount, the amount of the state money available for these income tax credits would triple. So other things being equal, that could be an 18% reduction in property taxes paid. So, I mean, these are, ballpark figures, but that gives some idea. So they're hoping that if this goes the way it's supposed to, and there's enough money, the state has enough money to pay the tax credits and stuff like that, that it could be a very significant property tax reduction down the road. And this is kind of the first installment.
One thing is certain, whether it be closing sales tax loopholes or limiting school spending, unless an alternative form of revenue can be agreed upon to generate additional property tax relief, we're going to have to wait and see if our current economic conditions will create tax revenue abundant enough to fully fund property tax relief in the years to come. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. Something I'm sure you'll continue to follow for us. Next up, according to the latest crop progress report, harvest in Nebraska is currently at 10% for both corn and soybeans. But before you begin storing this year's crop, there are some precautions to take so the grain stays in good condition. And one way the grain quality can be compromised is with an insect infestation. Nebraska Extension's Ron Seymour says there are some things you can be doing right now.
The most important thing for farmers to be doing, particularly now, is to make sure those grain bins are clean. And never put new grain on top of old grain. And it's really important to do a thorough job of cleaning so that you make sure and get underneath the floor, the drying portions, anything that's delivering grain, get that cleaned out as best you can.
And that means in addition to a shovel and broom, using a vacuum. Even tiny particles could house insect eggs or mold spores and could jeopardize new grain coming in. Once the bin is clean, it's time for the next step.
And then you want to follow that up with an insecticide application. And something like Tempo or deltamethrin, those different types of products. You do a coarse spray on there so that you get a good coverage of the sides of the bins, underneath the floor, underneath the aeration components, and get that all taken care of.
Ron also suggests keeping the bin at a proper temperature and following certain rules if you'll be storing the grain for a longer period of time.
If you're going to store that grain for more than 6 months, I would put a protectant in it, also an insecticide protectant. And that way it'll keep it in good condition through that longer period of time that you're storing. And then once you get it in the bin, getting it cool as soon as possible, because insects really don't grow and develop very well in temperatures below 50 degrees. And so if we can get it dry and cool right away, then our risks of having an insect pest problem are significantly reduced.
We've included more resources for preparing bins for harvest on the Market Journal website. Finally today, if you're interested in either starting a farm or growing your small-scale operation, we have an opportunity just for you. Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh spoke with Nebraska Extension's Katie King to learn more about the 6-week Aspiring Farmer virtual class.
Farming's not as simple as planting a seed and calling it good. You have to think about marketing, safety, budgeting, and so much more. For those new to the farming world, Nebraska Extension is offering a new course called Aspiring Farmer.
So the Aspiring Farmer course is a course designed for people that have dreamed to have a farm. These beginning farmers, people that have just recently started farming. These are people that are interested in living off the land in some aspect and then turning that into a business, whether that would be livestock or produce. We're looking at diversified operations.
The 6-week course will cover many topics that will be beneficial to those starting an operation.
The beginning is very much like dreaming up what your farm looks like, then going into holistic planning. And so this is thinking about applying your ideas with your goals and thinking long term so that you can be prepared for, challenges down the road and how to address those. Marketing, enterprise budgeting, resources that cover everything from like land access all the way to risk management and health insurance.
Although originally planned to be in person, the course will debut online using Zoom and Google Classroom to reach participants.
So our weekly meetings are going to be over Zoom, which we had definitely hoped that these would be in person. So that's one of the biggest things that's different. And then the farm tours that would normally be incorporated into this program are virtual. I've gone out to farms and shot video and spoken with the producers and incorporated those into 15, 20, 30-minute videos. So a little different learning, but providing that space where we can put them on the farm as best we can.
Registration is necessary and should be completed by the end of September. The course is in collaboration with a few different groups, but Katie says they all share the same goal.
We are working with FSA, we're working with NRCS, we're working with a lot of different organizations to bring a lot of resources together because the USDA in the last couple of years has really put a lot of effort towards beginning farmers, so we want to put those resources in people's hands. So.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
Thanks, Maddie. Once again, the course runs from October 6th to November 10th. Registration is required and the fee is $65, though there are some scholarships available. If you have questions, you can contact Katie at 402-267-2205. We've also got more information on the Market Journal website under this story. That's going to do it for this week's show. Remember, if you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media so you can join in on the conversation. And don't forget, you can get the latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak at covid19.unl.edu. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.